Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we're going to be talking about a foundation called We Hear You. This is a nonprofit organization in the Fresno area, but we'll learn more about that with Janis Wolpert and Traci Triplitt. Both of you, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Before I start, let's talk a little bit about your background. I mean, have you been in Fresno for a long time? Did you move here from another place? Let's get to know you a little bit.
Born and raised in Fresno.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah. No, I haven't lived my whole life in Fresno, but I was born here and back now. So
you've seen the city change since...
Oh, yes. I remember when Shaw Avenue was a dirt road.
And now it's a busy...
That was just 13 years ago,
wow.
remember?
How about you?
I was born in the Central Valley. I was born in Porterville.
Okay.
And just moved up the valley. So Porterville to Visalia, then to the Clovis area since about the 6th grade. So a long time now.
Yeah, and I was raised here, and I noticed the changes since I came in 1991. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure both of you have seen some changes and growth in the area.
Yes, very much so.
Talk about, either of you, talk about We Hear You, what this organization is about.
Well, We Hear You was established 8 years ago, officially established. However, there's a group of us that have been together probably 12 years. And it's a group of moms who all have children who were deaf, and we would get together and share stories. And we kind of, as we moved along, we thought, wow, we have really gained a lot of information that needs to be shared with others. We realized how isolated we are here in the Central Valley, and most of the services are a good 3 to 3.5 hour drive out of town. And so how can we help other parents in our same situation navigate the landscape of their treatment for their child once they're identified?
It sounds like you started this movement. I mean, if I understand you correctly, you just were getting together talking, and then it turned into what it is today. How did you all meet each other? I mean, I'm curious to know how you all met, and what did that process look like? Because even meeting and going to each other's house is a process.
Yeah.
So I met Janis and Diane after my daughter was diagnosed, and she started attending oral deaf preschool at Bernie Elementary School, and through that I was just connected with other families and parents, and that's how I think I originally got to know Janis and Diane. Was their children were older but had been through the same preschool program, and I think it was probably Louise Sussman, the teacher at the time, who helped me connect with them.
And Diane
Todd.
I've seen this name before.
Right.
Involved with the organization. So how was she a part of it?
Well, Diane and I were the founders of We Hear You 8 years ago, and so we did all the official paperwork to get us established as a nonprofit foundation. We really weren't sure what we were doing, but with the help of others, we established the foundation. So
I love, as I'm talking to you, I'm getting excited here because I love when things are being built from the ground up, and that's what it sounds like happened here. Tell us a little bit about, and we're going off track, but tell us a little bit about how that process of starting your own nonprofit, for someone watching saying, I have this great idea, we're a group of people that can make a change, but I'm scared or intimidated of the process. Is it a difficult process? And be honest with that.
Well, yes, you're navigating, the paperwork of the government and wondering if you're filling it out correctly. What do you put on what line and what does this mean? So yes, we did consult with a nonprofit attorney at some point to see whether or not we had put all the pieces together correctly before we submitted our forms. But it was quite trying. At several points we said, well, do we need to do this really? We have a group of folks here and we're going to continue, but it helped us with our fundraising and such down the road. So I'm glad we did it. We've now been established for 8 years, so it's been a good thing.
And I'm going to ask you about some fundraising events. I attended the crab feed you had recently.
Great.
And I enjoyed some delicious crab. And, for the record, it was the first time my wife had crab, and she loved it. So talk about that event a little bit, because when I went in, I didn't know what to expect. And I went in, and I see a bunch of silent auction items. I see a bunch of people there. I mean, it sounds like the community has supported you.
Yeah, very much. Well, it's not our
Crab.
crab feed. It is sponsored by Enterprise Rent a Car.
Okay.
And so every year they work very hard to put on this fundraising event, and we are the beneficiaries of that event. And most often it's, you know, when you do big celebrations like that, it's a lot of work. And so all of us at We Hear You volunteer a great deal of time to help get ready right alongside them, and I think they really appreciate that. We have, as you probably saw, some of our students there selling.
Yes, yes.
And so
raffle,
people get
yep.
to see how they can communicate, and so it's always a great event. There's not a better event, I don't think, that all of those silent auction and raffle items. Amazing, isn't it?
It was a big event. You had a lot of support there. Talk a little bit about the community. Has the community come around and supported this? It sounds like the answer is yes, but talk a little bit more about that.
I would say with the crab feed, with Enterprise's cooperation with us and naming us beneficiary of this event that they put on for their providers that they work with, that's one way the community has supported us. Some local things that have let us hold our picnic there have supported us, but really in general, I think that the community doesn't know a lot about us because we are a small nonprofit that is focused on a very specific target audience of parents of children who are deaf and hard of hearing. And so that's one thing we really are looking for, is more community awareness, more community involvement, more collaboration with local doctors, ear, nose, and throat doctors, Children's Hospital, Fresno State. We would like to really see more collaboration and cooperation in those areas to really get word out to better serve children and families in the Valley.
Do we know what causes this? I mean, what causes that?
What causes hearing loss?
Hearing loss.
Well, there are all kinds of causes for hearing loss. A child today that is born in a hospital in California is identified through newborn hearing screening. So at the time they are born, they're given a special test that gives feedback on whether or not there might be something going on. So if there's something that might be suspect, and they are referred to an audiologist. It's not a pass or fail, but it's a refer. And so we're able to catch more of these hearing loss issues at birth, especially if it's a significant one. Mm-hmm. But then there's hearing loss where you have fluid in the middle ear, you have atresia where one ear canal may be occluded. You may have different levels, just a mild or moderate hearing loss where they can hear a little bit. So there's all kinds of types of hearing loss. It's what do we do about it? How do we help them? Because most importantly, children need to learn language.
In the past 2 minutes that you've been talking, I've been introduced to a whole area that I knew nothing about. Is that a common reaction when you talk to parents or people? I mean, when you tell them what you just told me, do their eyes just kind of open and they say, wow?
Especially if they're the parent of a child,
Right.
because it's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get a master's in deaf education, and it's mind-boggling. So our parents, it's the first thing we do with our parents that we discover is important, is get them connected with other folks, other parents, and get them educated.
Mm-hmm.
When you meet new parents and they say, my child has this going on, do they feel isolated or alone? I mean, is that the kind of appearance, maybe appearance is not the correct word here, but is that the kind of feeling that you get, that they feel isolated, alone?
I'd say very much so. As a
Mm-hmm.
parent who experienced it, when you get that diagnosis, of whatever level of hearing loss to deafness there is, why? What do I do now? How do I get services? What are services? There's so many unknowns with the diagnosis that you do feel very isolated. And locally, like Janis mentioned earlier, most of the services, if you're seeking oral education or cochlear implant technology, you have to travel out of the Valley. And even local doctors aren't all that knowledgeable about who's a good candidate. My daughter was initially, I was told when she was being diagnosed, that she would never be a candidate for a cochlear implant. And within 6 months of that, she had a cochlear implant and is a great cochlear implant user. But so you do feel isolated, and you have to learn very quickly how to advocate for your child. And that's where I think We Hear You really strives to come alongside parents to provide them with the tools and resources to see what are the options for my child, what do I need to know, who do I need to talk to help my child be successful.
And I want to ask you about the implants because, you know, I say hearing aids, and I'm thinking of, you know, the hearing aid that sticks out of the ear, but there's also, I was educated on this before we started the program, that there's also implants. So can you tell us a little bit about these implants?
Sure, and hearing aids are quite fascinating today. About 2009-10, they went through a change, and they went from an analog, which just makes everything louder, to a digital. So the hearing aids have improved immensely, and they look very much like a cochlear implant. So a cochlear implant is actually a two-part system. One part is surgically implanted, and the other part is on the outside, and that's what looks like a hearing aid. So there's a little computer chip inside the part that's worn on the outside, and it contains what we call a map. And it doesn't stand for anything. It's just an acronym that somebody labeled. And so a map is the computer program that helps the child digitally listen to information, and that gets sent to the brain.
I was going to ask you about technology in this industry a little later on, but thank you for taking me that road. So it sounds like as technology is evolving, as you know, people are researching this, there's easier ways or more helpful ways to help the child. Is that a true statement?
It is a true statement, very much so. The landscape from deaf education has changed. It's just growing by leaps and bounds. And we're probably at that point now, if we can get parents to understand what their role is in all of this. We pretty much have children who are entering right back into the mainstream with their neighborhood children and being educated right alongside them.
How do parents know that this is a problem? I mean, is there obviously we talked about the test when the child is first born, but if this develops later on, tell us about, you know, what happens next. I mean, how do I know? Let's say my child, you know, and I'm using me as an example because I remember the test where the nurse or someone came in and gave him a test about his hearing. So let's say that when he's 5 years old and he starts, you know, having issues with his hearing, what are the signs I should be looking for, and what happens next?
So a little earlier than 5, if your child were to start to develop things, would be looking at language development. So babies learn to produce sounds as they play with their mouth and their tongue. And most babies will start with babbling or cooing first, which are vowel sounds. So if you have a baby that never moves beyond vowel sounds, so oohs and ahs, they don't start doing ba 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 or da da da, that would be an indicator, because to produce those sounds, you have to hear those sounds. And then from there, if their language seems really delayed, if their vocabulary is particularly small, if their pronunciation of words, nothing comes out clear, that would be an indication, something to talk to your pediatrician about, to follow up with, to say, why? Can we look into this? Because if children have access, auditory access to sound, and they don't have any oral motor issues, they should start to produce speech, intelligible speech. You know, by 2 and by 4, there's markers of what letter sounds they should be able to make, what type of words and blends they should be producing. That, and then if your child is constantly distracted, not engaged with other children, asking you to repeat themselves, saying huh a lot, all of those would be things that would indicate potential hearing loss.
Why is it important for parents to get involved at an early stage? I mean, so
important.
You have a parent that says, you know what, my child is 3 years old or 4 years old. He or she will grow out of it.
We do have people who make those comments. In fact, I had one dad say to me 5 or 6 years ago when his daughter was diagnosed deaf at birth, that, well, it's okay, we're just going to let her be because she can make a decision when she gets to be 9 or 10 years old whether or not she wants the cochlear implant. Well, that child is not learning to listen. She does not have a cochlear implant. Therefore, she will sign, which is fine. That will be her mode of communication. Parents are the people that are making decisions for children when they're young. That's our job, to make decisions for our children. And so a child that's born deaf today that is under the guardianship of a parent who is informed will, regardless of the choices for communication, the earlier they get started, the the better. And there are times when, regardless of how they might want to communicate, they think that they're going to grow out of it, but it doesn't happen that way, unfortunately.
And if I can add, early intervention is so important because children have a language acquisition window. So a child, to get maximum benefit from a cochlear implant, the earlier they're implanted, the more potential for success they're going to have, because they're stimulating those auditory pathways and those neural pathways. And for example, my daughter got no benefit from hearing aids. Her hearing loss was too severe, but because she was implanted at 18 months, by the time she was ready to start kindergarten, she started in a regular classroom with no special education services, because her cochlear implant was timed at a time when her brain was still prime and receptive to learn language and to be able to produce it. So it's not that there isn't benefit to getting a cochlear implant later, especially if it was a progressive hearing loss, so they had hearing and it diminished. But the earlier you start, whether it's a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, speech therapy, all those treatments, the earlier that starts, the better potential outcome for the child.
Many people think it's a light switch. So I get that cochlear implant and I just turn it on, and oh, now I can see. It's different. You have to listen for a period of time before you start before you start to speak. And so when you think of a baby that's born, right, they're listening. They listened in utero since about 5 or 6 months old, and then they've listened after they're born, and like Traci said, play with all those sounds. So the therapy that comes along with receiving a cochlear implant is incredibly important. It's more of a coaching model. It coaches the parents on how to work with their child through a progression of lessons, and that's something that we hear you will provide to families in the Central Valley.
What, do you do anything for teachers? I mean, let's say that I'm a teacher and I have students in my classroom and I want to help out some way, or I want to identify and assist the organization or assist a child. What are the services that you provide?
Well, right now we have 2 oral programs in the Central Valley, one in Fresno County and the other in Fresno Unified. And with those teachers, we provide opportunities for them to attend professional development. It's always out of town because we don't have anything locally, but we're on the East Coast or in the Bay Area attending professional development opportunities where they can learn more about what it is they need to do in the classroom. And so we will provide scholarships for that. There's a group of teachers right now that are on the way to be certified with A.G. Bell. They're going to learn more about the listening and speaking certification that's offered by them. So We Hear You helps fund those things.
Training opportunities.
Right.
And the next question I had is, so how else can people help you? So the crab feed I went to, obviously, but other than that, you accept donations of hearing aids. What other things are you looking for?
Well, right now we are in need of a machine, an OAE.
OAE.
And it's a type of device that can measure hearing loss to help the school district, the audiologists who work in the school district. It's something that they could use because there's such a backlog there at Valley Children's that we have children going on for 3 and 4 months that we need to know what's going on, what kind of hearing do they have, can we fit them with hearing aids? So donations go directly either back to the teachers to promote more training,
to provide therapy for families.
Right.
We cover the cost of therapy for families. We sometimes, with families that have to travel, if they do not have the means, we'll provide them with gas, lodging money so that they can go to appointments in the Bay Area. So,
is this something that's growing in this area? I mean, it sounds like years ago there was not much, or I shouldn't say there was not much thought, but it wasn't at this scale.
Oh, no.
We Hear You comes out. Now
Right.
you've got support for teachers and parents. If you were to chart this, are we going more and more people interested in this area and
Yes.
getting involved in
Yes.
this area?
Technology's not going away, and the advances in technology as it relates to hearing loss is just amazing. I would say even more so in the last 5 to 6 years. It's unreal to even think where it might go in another 10 years. It's really amazing.
Why do you, and I'll ask both of you this question, why do you do what you do so much with this organization? I mean, we're all busy. We all have tons of things going on. It sounds like the family members of both of you, your children, are on the right path.
Right.
And they're hearing better.
Right.
So it's easy for you to say, you know what, my job here is done, and go do something else. But I don't see that in both of you. I see the passion you have for this organization. Why do you do what you do?
Well, we have recognized that Fresno is still a far leap away from meeting the needs of children and families who would like their children to listen and speak if they have been given a diagnosis of deafness. And it's a journey. We know how hard it is. It's hard for the teachers to support the parents. It's hard for the parents to support themselves. And information is far away. So 3.5 hours to Stanford, USF, or down south to John Traci. That's a long drive for parents to receive those services. So I do it because of the love of what happens to families and just watching them grow and be happy and realize that their child can live a joyous life and dance and listen to music. So,
Same question.
Because I saw the benefit for my daughter, I want parents to know what this option is. I want them to know that it's a viable option, that deaf children can learn to listen and speak because of technology and because of resources. You know, there was a point where I was told my daughter would never speak and she would never be a cochlear implant candidate. But because I persisted, you know, she has danced in dance recitals and she sings and talks nonstop. And it's frustrating to me that she's 13 and a lot of our parents who are newly diagnosed kind of get the same responses locally until they connect with the right people. There's just not enough information. There's not enough awareness that oral education is an option for profoundly deaf children. And so just to see other parents have access to that information, access to making that choice for themselves, to recognize the potential for their child, and just, I want people to know, I want them to be aware. I want our community to be aware, and local doctors and medical providers and educators to be aware.
Yep, and we are all volunteers. We have one position, our auditory verbal therapist, we do help fund, not completely. She drives all over the country to reach parents and help reach the We Hear You arm out to them. And so we all of our funds, everything that comes to us goes back into the community to help the families.
Prior to attending your crab feed and doing research about you, I had no idea. I really did not know. I mean, I knew that obviously there's children who have hearing issues, but I had no idea the details here. Do you think that people in this community don't really understand this area? I mean, do we get it, or do we have ways to go?
We have ways to go. Yeah, we definitely
I don't
have a
think
ways
until
to go.
you're touched by it, you have a reason to know, and that's okay, but when families are touched by it, the information needs to be there. The resources need to be accessible. The doctors need to provide accurate information.
Right.
So that families do have options and choices, whether they want to pursue oral education or sign language, but that they know that there are options and choices.
They need to make informed
Decisions.
choices.
Informed
Yeah,
choices.
that's exactly right.
For the parents out there that are down, they're disappointed, they're getting help for their children, but they feel beat up, or they feel down. What I mean, you two have experienced it, and it sounds like your children are getting better. What advice would you give them? What would you tell them right now if they're listening to you?
Well, I think it's important to reach out to others. And so if we can help you do that, we're more than happy to do so. I think one of the most joyous observations of our foundation is getting parents together with other parents, because there's nothing better than having a friend. That's what started the foundation. And we met religiously there for a while with dinner and bottle of wine and sharing stories about our children and how healthy that was for us. And then one person would say, have you tried this, or have you looked there? Parents are a wealth of information when they get going.
How can people find out more information about this organization? We talked about the crab feed. Are there any other events or anything that people can participate in?
Well, coming up, we're going to have family meetings. So
Okay.
if they're interested in learning more about the IEP process, how to contact an audiologist, or the process of just getting through your appointments, they can contact us via our phone number.
And you can provide that?
Okay, it's 559-225-2665.
And then do you have a website?
We do.
And these meetings occur how often?
Well, this string of meetings isn't scheduled yet, but it will be probably the fall. We have a couple of fundraising events in the fall. Fairmont Private School also donates their back to school. That's a private thing, but their back to school proceeds go to help us as well. And then the crab feed. But we don't have anything else scheduled until these family meetings get in process.
We're running out of time this week on the program, but, and real briefly, everybody who comes on the program gets a magic wand. And with that magic wand, you get to say a wish. So, we'll start with you, Miss Janis. You have this magic wand.
I wish that someday we can have a building that will serve children right here in the Central Valley.
And Miss Traci?
I wish that every child who has a referral for newborn hearing screening would be given packets of information with resources and our contact information to let them know where they can go for help and assistance.
Lastly, your contact information and what you're looking for in donations.
Our contact information is area code 559-225-2665. Our website is wehearyoufoundation.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the
Thank you
program.
for having us.
Yes,
Thank you
thanks
for
so much.
sharing all this great information with our audience members. I love hearing how this started as parents talking, and it kind of built to where it is today. And you know, the future for you all and your organization is a bright one.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew that makes this production and every production possible, thank you. We couldn't do it without you. Our audience members listening on KFSR 90.7 FM, thank you for tuning in again. And to those watching this broadcast on Comcast 93 and AT&T 99, the CMAC channel, thank you. Tune in next week for a new program.